That's
All right,
on.
Madam Chair, we are recording and broadcasting. Floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I call the July 14th meeting of the Delta Independent Science Board to order. Welcome, everyone. I'm going to remind folks that we have a public comment process. So we'll take written questions and comments, and you can follow the instructions on your screen or on the meeting notice. And we also have some housekeeping items that Edmund Yu is going to take care of. So Edmund, to you.
Yes, so for those who are in the resources building, in the event of an evacuation, everyone must remain calm, take all of your belongings, and proceed to the nearest exit outside of the building. Staff will gather at the evacuation point on 16th, 15th, 9th Street, and the public is welcome to join us. The code for the restrooms is on the whiteboard in the back of the room. That concludes our housekeeping. Thank you.
Thanks, Edmund. And so now we'll just do our usual roll call. Please state your name and whether you have any new declarations. Dr. Brandt.
Steve Brandt, no new declarations.
Dr. Heikela.
Anna McCulloch, no new declarations.
Heikela, no new declarations. Oh.
Sorry, I must have broken up a bit. Okay, so we have Tanya. Anna, go ahead. Speak again.
Oh, Anna McCulloch, no new declarations.
Great, thanks. Tom.
Tom Holzer, no new declarations.
I've dropped the honorific. No, we don't have Diane. Bob.
Bob Nyman, no new declarations.
And Inga. You're muted, Inga.
Sorry, Inga Werner, no new declarations.
And I'm Lisa Winger, no new declarations. Okay, we have a quorum. Let's move on. So the agenda today is pretty simple. We are primarily discussing the two revised prospectuses for the subsidence and the DMDU reviews, and we're going to see if the board is ready to take action after we discuss the public comment. And we also have a Delta lead scientist report. So are there any public comments on the agenda, Edmund?
There are none.
Okay, well then we'll get right into item number 2. First, we have the usual chair's report before we get into the meat of things. And first, I'd just like to welcome Dr. Shoko Shinbrat to the Delta ISB staff support team. She is going to be assisting the Delta ISB and the DSC with social science research. She has experience with interviews, surveys, and is going to be able to help support our reviews. So just for context, she's filling the position left by Dr. Chelsea Batavia early this year. And as a result, she's going to step into helping out with the decision-making under deep uncertainty review as one of her initial ISB projects. And let me just give Dr. Shinbrat a chance to introduce herself.
Hi, all. Thank you so much for that brief interjection. My name is Shoko Shinbrat. I'm a conservation social scientist and new hire at the Delta Stewardship Council, which, like Lisa said, I'll be supporting the board with DMDU. I'll also be integrating social science into other parts of our work, like salinity management, and investigating best practices for interweaving indigenous traditional knowledge with science that we do at the council. For just a little bit of background on, my education and training, my doctoral research focused on a number of water-related issues around the world, including, determinants for why smallholder farmers in Chiapas adapt to climate change, how to best engage the public in participatory water monitoring, and social and natural outcomes of payment for watershed programs. And since then, I've taught 2 courses at Cornell University, one which was on global water sustainability, and I most recently worked at the National Science Foundation in the Arctic section, where I was particularly involved in navigating the new Arctic, which funds convergent research with a particular interest in amplifying and supporting Indigenous-led research. So I look forward to working with you all and learning from you and your expertise in the time ahead. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Shoko, and we did get a chance to meet individually, and I will say that I'm impressed with Shoko's breadth. She's really done quite a variety of things that I think will serve her well in this new position, and I really look forward to working with her. She's going to provide a deeper dive into some of her research at a future date, so we'll get a presentation from her and learn more. Okay, moving on. The next thing I'd like to bring up is some tour reflections, and I'd like folks to be thinking about what they might want to share in terms of what they learned. We really appreciated the USGS and the USBR speakers for taking us on a tour of the Delta Cross Channel, the Central Delta, and the Cache Slough Complex as part of the June ISB meeting. And just to remind folks what was done, we had a pre-tour presentation where we received an overview of the tour and an overview of the hydrodynamics, biochemistry, and phytoplankton dynamics of the Delta. And we particularly appreciated the details on the nature of the net downstream flow in certain areas, given the relative magnitudes of tides and river flow. That's clearly an important driver for understanding water quality. The slides from that pre-tour briefing are part of the meeting materials for June for anyone who couldn't attend or is curious. Okay, then we did the tour of the Delta Cross Channel, and we learned how that facility is really key to maintaining water quality in the Central Delta, and that they are planning some upcoming gate improvements that should make life easier for both operators and boaters, it sounded like. We took a tour of the Central Delta, and there we discussed salinity intrusion, the primary control on exports from the Delta in the summer, and some effects of Frank's Tract on water quality and salmon. And we also learned a bit about the history of HABs in this region and plans for new monitoring. Then we had that tour of Cache Slough Complex, and we learned that it is one of two places in the San Francisco Bay Delta estuary where marsh restoration is intended to increase food production at scale. And that this area is thought to be food limited, so that's an important process. And the similar goals exist at Suisun Marsh. So I just want to reflect that overall, I was really impressed with the body of research from the USGS on water quality and the plans to make use of new technologies. They talked about monitoring and doing research on system processes in a variety of ways, such as using NASA partners who had remote sensing ability to detect methyl mercury. So some really innovative stuff and just quite a lot of breadth and depth. And so I was, quite pleased to learn about all that work. Does anyone else want to add any reflections about the tour? Steve, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. This is my, I think, third boat tour I've taken. And I think that, as board members, many from outside of the region, one of the real values of these sort of tours is that we get away from words, numbers, and graphs and get a chance to get a real feel for the Delta, to see the habitats, to feel the currents, to see the currents, and perhaps most importantly, to get a sense of the scale and complexity of the Delta itself. And I think that appreciation is can be lost when we're just reviewing documents and things like that. And I think that sort of helps us to get refocused on really what we're looking at and some of the scales that we're dealing with when we talk about the issues we're dealing with. So I want to thank everybody again for an excellent tour, really valuable tour, and we didn't lose anybody overboard, and that's always a good thing. So
Thanks, Steve. Very important comments. Inga.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to mention what stuck the most with me is the strong conviction of the USGS folks that led the boat tour that restoration efforts would be, or money for restoration efforts would be well spent in the Cache Slough area and not so much in the areas that are surrounded by riprap and, are very far away from natural systems. So I think, yeah, I don't know if it was the energy that was expended on making that point or what, but that stuck with me.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Inga. Tom.
Yeah, even though I wasn't on this trip, I've followed that route before. And one of the things I wanted to point out was, and I only realized this recently, in the re-wetting review that we've been talking about for the Delta, the open water tracks haven't gotten much attention. For example, what's the greenhouse gas emission budget for these open tracks? So that I suspect that our workshop will be talking about Frank and Mildred's track and what the implications of those kind of settings are, because probably many of the islands are going to be left flooded as it evolves into the future.
Did anyone else have the experience of Tom freezing there for a second? Not just me. Yeah, people did. Okay, so Tom, just so you know, your internet may be a little unstable, but thank you for those comments, Tom. So let me just ask a clarifying question. So you're saying the key thing that might change greenhouse gas emissions could be inundation of existing terrestrial land. Is that what you're saying?
No, our understanding of how these open water tracks what their contribution to greenhouse gas emissions isn't all that well studied. We've tended to focus on other efforts where we have restoration efforts going of one kind or another.
Okay, all right, thank you, Tom. Bob.
I really appreciated the tour. It was a chance to actually, see what was going on the ground and what the ecological system looked like and felt like while we were out there. But I think the one thing I appreciated the most was their willingness to discuss difficult subjects or difficult issues. For example, they shared their hypothesis with us that the Delta is starving, and a lot of their work seemed to revolve around that hypothesis. But when questions were asked of them, for example, about the role of detrital food webs or the roles of kind of soft-bodied zooplankton in the system, things that aren't traditionally looked at by the agencies, they were very honest in their responses about it. Basically saying they knew very, very little about those pathways of productivity in the Delta, and we're hoping to be able to do more in the future. So, they've focused on, I think, some well-traveled avenues ecologically in the Delta, but haven't been able to develop the funding or the programs that are needed to look at other pathways that are a lot more difficult to look at ecologically and technically, and they were willing to talk about that in a very open way, and I greatly appreciated that. So, it wasn't as though they were trying to give us a party line or give us, just one viewpoint. They were willing to discuss other viewpoints of how the ecological system worked. So, thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. I think that's always important probably one of the key roles we play is to try to get people focused on some of the more difficult questions, because they're going to have already a lot of incentives to do some of the easier or more obvious things. So I think that's a really good point. Okay, all right, well, let's, hearing no other comments, I'll move on to the next item in my briefing, which is Delta lead scientist recruitment. So we did reappoint Laura Larson to her current position, but we need to start the process of recruiting the next Delta lead scientist. So the Delta Stewardship Council, in partnership with the U.S. Geological Survey, is already in the process of recruiting the next Delta lead scientist. And per the Delta Reform Act, the council consults with the Delta ISB on this appointment. And basically that means that we provide a recommendation to the council on who should be appointed. So you should have received a copy of the flyer. It was released on July 6th, and applications are due on August 25th. And a copy of that flyer is part of your meeting packet. So soon we will be heavily involved in that. At our August meeting, we'll discuss who would like to join the Delta Lead Scientist interview panel, which will review applications, conduct interviews, and help inform the board's recommendation on who the council should appoint. And that committee will include 3 Delta ISB members, 3 council representatives, and 1 USGS representative. Okay, does anyone have any questions about that? Comments? No. Okay, let's move on then. So you also received some things in your packet that may have been a bit confusing. So, and that has to do with this next agenda item, which is that the Central Valley Regional Water Quality Control Board will be releasing a draft pyrethroid research plan later next week for public comments. And first, we wanted the board or anyone else who doesn't already know a background about the water board. So that's why that is in your handout, because it's interesting how there's some division of labor among the water boards. So the Central Valley Regional Water Quality Control Board is one of the 9 regional boards that work in coordination with the State Water Resources Control Board to preserve, protect, enhance, and restore water quality. And, oh, Edmund's going to share that handout, I think. Okay, so the State Water Resources Control Board, Bay Delta program in the Division of Water Rights sets flow and some water quality objectives, such as temperature, for the region, while the regional boards like the Central Valley Regional Water Quality Control Board, who's putting out this plan, they develop and enforce water quality objectives and implementation plans for nutrients and contaminants. So there is a water quality control plan for the Sacramento River and San Joaquin River basins that I'll refer to from now on as the Basin Plan that the Central Valley Regional Board adopted in 1975. So this has been in place for a while, but in 2017, the Regional Board adopted a Basin Plan amendment, which established the pyrethroid control program. So that program modifies the Basin Plan to include the pyrethroid conditional prohibition for the Sacramento and San Joaquin River basins and established a total maximum daily load. So what does this have to do with the ISB? So the Central Valley Regional Water Quality Control Board indicated at the Delta ISB Water Quality Review Implementation Workshop in January of 2019, so that predates most of us, that the implementation of the Basin Plan Amendment could help implement some of the recommendations from the Delta ISB's 2018 Water Quality Review. So if memory serves, we basically pointed out some issues that weren't necessarily being well evaluated in current water quality analysis. And so they are being responsive to that recommendation. And so the pyrethroid control program included a provision that the regional board will work with stakeholders to develop a pyrethroid research plan that will describe research and other special studies to inform future iterations of this control program. And that includes potential objectives and program refinements. The Basin Plan Amendment requires the regional board to coordinate and consult with the Delta ISB, among other entities, on this plan. And so as part of this coordination, the regional board provided an early copy of the draft pyrethroid research plan to the Delta ISB staff. And although they are not requesting a review from the ISB is welcome to comment when the plan is out for public comment. Okay, so now it gets easier because Inga has done some legwork on this already. She volunteered to take a look at this plan and see if this plan warrants a full board review or some other level of investment. And so we're going to hear from her in a second, but basically we're comparing 2 options. Either the whole board reviews it and we make comments as a board, or if it doesn't warrant that level, individual members are welcome to comment. So let me turn it over to Inga now to explain more about this.
Thank you, Lisa. I think you did half of my work already by giving the background of this. I looked at that as well to understand the context, but you already did a great job of explaining that. I went back and briefly looked at the DISB report on water quality and just wanted to briefly summarize some major findings. So overall, the board concluded that there's still much uncertainty about the effects of nutrients and some contaminants on the delta ecosystem. So that's not much new. Another finding was that it was not clear, or it is not clear, whether water quality data being collected optimally support management decisions and policies, and that there is a need to further assess the effects of chemical contaminants on the Delta ecosystem through holistic studies to better understand the interactions between chemical contaminants and other stressors, to monitor additional contaminants and increase the temporal and spatial coverage of this monitoring, to improve collaboration among agencies, and to improve data management, especially regarding quality assurance and quality control. Now, I just wanted, if anybody would like to add something to that or thinks it's too brief, please correct me. Then I went to the draft pyrethroid research plan, and I was asked to briefly explain what pyrethroids are, because obviously not everybody is that has that detailed knowledge. So I just want to say pyrethroids are a group of insecticides which are highly toxic to both invertebrates and fish, aquatic invertebrates and fish. There's a distinction between pyrethroids, which are synthetic compounds, and the natural compound pyrethrin. Pyrethrin is derived from plants, and it is less toxic and less persistent than the synthetic pyrethroids. Why is this important? Pyrethroids have been detected at levels of concern for aquatic species in waters and sediments of the Sacramento and San Joaquin River watersheds, including the Delta, of course. And the other important fact is that pyrethroids are very, very toxic at extremely low concentrations. So mortality can occur in some species at concentrations of a few nanograms per liter, parts per billion. And therefore monitoring for these compounds is quite difficult. They're sticky, they require special analytical methods, and limits of detection should really be in the parts per trillion, which is picograms per liter range, which is a challenge for a lot of chemical labs. Analytical labs. So back to the draft pyrethroid research plan, which I'm actually not sure. Regulatory speech always makes my brain twist a little. So I'm actually not sure if this conditional prohibition means that pyrethroids cannot be applied at the moment, but I doubt it, because there is a second part of the sentence that describes it that says conditional prohibition which does not allow pyrethroid discharges at concentrations above specified aquatic life protection based concentration triggers, which I assume is another way of saying water quality objectives, unless the discharger is implementing a management plan to reduce pyrethroid levels in their discharges. So again, if somebody knows this, I'm fairly sure they can still be applied. The regional board found that adequate information was not available at the time to establish numeric water quality objectives for pyrethroids. And this is where this pyrethroid research plan comes in. So if I understand right, the water quality objectives do not have to be set for another 15 years maximum. So this pyrethroid research plan was developed to generate the information that's needed to establish these water quality objectives for pyrethroids. And there's a number of things that are suggested that need to be tackled, and with what kind of information should be generated. So that's a very brief overview. And I can, if you want, I can read to you the points that they would like to tackle in this research plan. But I think a DISB report would be beneficial. It could address questions like, does the research plan optimally address management needs? Or what was pointed out in the DISB review heavily, that does the research plan adequately address open questions concerning ecosystem effects on pyrethroids? Now, I'm not entirely sure if this is within the scope of this research plan, but it was one of the big issues that the DISB took with regard to existing water quality monitoring. Then we could also answer a question like, how will research efforts be coordinated with other agencies? Is the data management, including quality assurance, part of the plan? So these are the things that I put down as possible foci that the DISB could look at with regard to this plan. But
Let me just ask one
it's a-
clarifying question, Inga. Thank you for that very nice summary and the explanation of effects of pyrethroids. I wasn't aware of all of them. How much detail does the research plan have? That's one of my key questions. In terms of, is there much for us to dig into, or would we be working at a very high level in terms of this is what a research plan should have?
I mentioned that my expertise in pyrethroid research is fairly substantial. I can see detailed things that I would add or point at within the research plan, but I was trying to focus on the overarching questions that were also raised in the DISB report or review from 2018. You know, does it really adequately address the questions that are important for management of these compounds? Is there collaboration between agencies or that kind of thing? So there are some points that the DISB could address in more depth, but we could also get into more detail. I'm really not sure, and I would really like to hear from others what they think. Because I'm so deeply in the topic, it's hard for me to take the big picture view on this one. It's fairly detailed, of course. It needs to get into the toxicology of things. It has to look at partition coefficients and things like that. It is clearly guided by people's questions when they have to derive water quality objectives. So they want more data on interactive effects with other stressors, with temperature, for example. They want more data on sublethal effects, on toxic effects on, or toxic thresholds for taxa other than the general model organisms, that kind of thing. So it's very, the questions are the common questions that we have in ecotoxicology overall. You know, there's never enough data to really come up with numbers that would indicate that are definitive, because there's always uncertainty. So you could do a lot of research and still not get there. And the points that are listed in the draft report they could have been formulated 25 years ago in a way. And there was, a lot of research in the meantime. So I'm not sure if this
Okay, no,
answers your
that's
question.
helpful. Well, I'm
Yeah.
just trying to get a feel for how much there was to review. So I think you've helped.
Yeah.
Let's see what others have to say. Go ahead, Bob.
Hi, Inga. I
Hi.
was really wondering if more research was really needed. After all, you can always do research upon research upon research, but is more information needed in order to set regulations? It sounds like they to get this supported, they want to move the formulation of regulations 15 years into the future, and then give groups or support groups to do more research. But like you said, it sounds like 25 years ago, there was enough information to actually set some basic regulations. Anyway, I like the idea of, I'm glad the research is being done, but I also at the same time, it greatly concerns me that there aren't regulations in place as we speak, to deal with some of the issues around pyrethrins.
Yes, and I really didn't want to say this, but you're putting me on the spot. I mean, other countries are deriving water quality criteria or objectives with the data that exists. So
yeah, exactly. So, okay, good.
Thanks, Bob. Steve.
Hi, I just want two basic questions. One is that you said it was going out, this document was going out for public review. Do you know when it's going out for public review and how much time is going to be allowed for public review?
Yeah, Edmund. Yeah, exactly.
It should go out next week if all goes according to plan, based on what the information that the regional board provided. And they would think that public comments will close mid-September, September 18th. But until we get the public announcement, that's just preliminary information.
So one could conclude that that's the time frame we would want to do something if we did something as a board or an individual?
Correct.
Okay, the second question is a more general question is, we have in the past gotten various requests to do reviews. I don't think we've actually gotten a request to do this one in particular, if I read the stuff. Are there a whole bunch of these? You said there's 9 of these sort of regional boards. Do they have a lot of research plans like this? Is just the only one out there and we should review it because of that? Or there's a bunch of them out there and we just happen to be listed on in this particular one? I want to know if we're opening Pandora's box by selectively picking this one versus 9 other ones that are out there, or not. Maybe this is the only one. Do we know that, Edmund?
Yeah, there are other, so the basin plans, and there are research plans associated with them, but I would say the one that's Delta focus is the Central Regional Water Quality Control Board. And I would say like probably the main factors of review, if the board decides to take on this review. First, ISB is listed as a coordinating entity in the basin plan amendment. And the other is based off the findings from the water quality review implementation workshop back in 2019. This was an item where they mentioned how implementing the basin plan amendment could help address some of the water quality recommendations from the ISB review. So I think those are the 2 things that are different than just other research plans that are out there.
Okay, I think if we moved in that direction, we want to set up the criteria by which we made this selection and can ignore others.
it's this draft report actually, or this draft report is only 25 pages long, just to let you know. It's not huge.
That's good. That was exactly what I was looking for, how detailed, so that's helpful. But yeah,
Okay.
Steve, your point is well taken, that we should be clear about the scope of what we do and do not review. But it does seem that this is responsive to something we said, and potentially we could apply some criteria we've already created to this to just say, does this follow some of our recommendations or not? Is at least one thing we could do. Obviously, you can go deep. Well, Inga can go deeper because she knows a lot more about it, but. And to Bob's point, I think this idea of do we already have enough information to act, this comes up a lot, especially with respect to TMDLs. And I just wanted to add that because there are often cost implications of exactly where you set the threshold, huge cost implications, it can be really important to do research so that you understand, what you're getting back for reducing things, as opposed to being very precautionary, which sounds great ecologically, but can be really hard for agriculture to adapt to. So I just wanted to put that out there as the sole economist on the board, that there can be reasons to nail down more details. Virginia. You need to unmute, Virginia.
Yeah, I
There you
tried
go.
to. Okay, you can hear me now? Okay, I'm sorry, I came in late to this. I have no prior, I have no new conflicts. I never said that. But one of the questions I have about this is trade-offs. I know little about pyrethrins, except that it seems that they started being used because of other fossil fuel-based chemicals were more expensive, is the story I've heard. Anyway, I wonder about the trade-offs of the repercussions of using pyrethrins and pyrethroids versus other alternatives. Is that mentioned at all in this report?
No, Virginia, that's not mentioned. I mean, pyrethroids have been used for, I don't know, I'm guessing 30, 40 years, and they pretty much came in after the organophosphates got into trouble for toxicity to humans, toxicity in the environment, and then the use of pyrethroids started going up. And as I mentioned, the monitoring is extremely difficult because the conventional chemical analytical approaches were just not adequate. So if you get lots of things below detection levels, you think you're safe. Some people think they're safe. So until we as researchers started looking at this in more detail and also looking at the toxicity of things to aquatic organisms, it got ignored for a long time. So the trade-offs of not using pyrethroids, I agree with you. I was told in Switzerland, I was told by somebody from the ag department, they said, we're running out of pesticides to use, and what are we giving the farmers to replace these things? So that is an issue. On the other hand, they can do a lot of damage in aquatic systems. So there is a trade-off there as well, where we have to consider that.
Okay, thank you. That was my understanding as well, that, they came in and used in the 40s, but I would think looking at trade-offs would be part of a review if it were to be done.
Thanks, Virginia. Yeah, or at least what information would you need to review those trade-offs from the toxicology side? Yeah.
I think the most important questions of the one that I put out there is the first one. Does the research plan optimally address management needs? That in my mind is the biggest question. Does this really need another 15 years of research to manage these things? That would be a big focus, I think.
I think you've teed up some really nice questions, Inga. So I guess the question now is, so we would only, after Steve's question, I registered that we might only have something like 6 weeks to do this. Is that what did I hear that correctly? I guess that's a question for Edmund if he's available.
Yep, that's correct.
Okay. So that is not a lot of time, given that we're we're actively doing many other things right now. Let's see, what else do we need to consider in terms of committing to this? I mean, it sounds like Inga's already started to do some important legwork. Should we, at this point, form a committee, or is there anyone else who would like to work on a committee that would take an in-depth view of this? Do folks feel like they have capacity to do this in August and early September? Because we need, if we're going to make it a board effort, we'd need something, in early September for us to review, probably, just to give time to modify and before we have to submit it. Does that sound feasible to folks? Yeah, Steve.
I'm not volunteering for a committee. I don't think we're allowed to. I don't think we're allowed to have committees anyway. What I would, it seems to me there's two levels of review here. One is a board level review, which kind of addresses, is this consistent to the general recommendations we make in the water quality review? And I think a number of board members could provide a reasonable input on that particular topic. And then there's sort of the second, I want to say, Inga level review, where she and maybe some others could dive into some details and say words that probably I don't understand. And so I guess the question is, are those one report, or can we do a board high level review and Inga as an individual, let's say, do a detailed review, or how do we mix those two levels of a review if we decide to move forward at all?
Yeah, good question, Steve. Let's hear from some others, and maybe some of them will have some answers. Oh, Anna put her hand down. You still want to?
I think it automatically, I think there's a new timer feature in Zoom that it assumes you're no longer interested in talking if you have been for some amount of time. Along the same lines as what was just said, I think it would be good to know sort of cost benefits, so to speak, in the sense that, in principle, we could do a very detailed, in-depth, heavy review on one end of the spectrum. On the other end of the spectrum, Inga could lead the drafting of, let's say, a one-page letter. And what I don't have a good sense of is what is the likely impact of our input as a function of where we are on that spectrum. The impact of us writing one-page letter is the same as the impact of Inga leading a, 20, 30-page review. Then, of course, that additional effort is not worthwhile. It's not going to impact the thinking, impact the process in any more substantive way. And I don't know if those who have been on the board much longer than I have a sense of where that sweet spot is, where in situations such as these, where we haven't been explicitly asked to provide a review, what is the most effective way to recognize limitations of our efforts, but at the same time, try to have it back when we can. And Lauren is raising her hand. I'm getting to answer that question.
Lauren clearly has some thoughts. Go ahead, Lauren.
Hear me?
Yeah.
I can't hear you.
Okay. I'm in the room with Edmund, so we're using the same microphone. I just wanted to weigh in that in terms of impact, this is just my opinion from being in the system, that I think the fact that the regional board has reached out to you suggests to me that they will pay attention to your review. So that's one thing. You got an early draft, so they're interested at least in following what they said they would do. The second thing is this is linked to regulations. And so at least in my experience, any comments on things linked to regulations are likely to have more impact. And I would expect that they will have to produce some sort of response to comments. Maybe I can't speak to the details, but those are my suggestions, that this is the type of review that is likely to be paid attention to and has high potential to have an impact.
Can I ask a quick follow-up question, Lauren? Based on your experience, do you have, I'm not sure if recommendation is the right word, but wisdom on sort of what level of detail would be, of course, in the absence of other criteria, more is always better, right? But where's that sort of cost benefit sweet spot in terms of the level of detail that would be effective here?
What I heard from Inga sounded like the right level of detail. I think pointing to the review that the Independent Science Board did previously and is a really good idea. So keeping within that context. And that's, I mean, I would say start there at that level. And then if there's interest, they may reach out to you for additional detail. So I wouldn't recommend diving into a lot of detail, if that makes sense. The other suggestion I have, and I don't know if Edmund knows more about this, but I think we could even ask regional board staff to make a presentation to the board on this, if you'd like. And that might give an opportunity for asking some questions and getting more information. And I'm looking at Evan, I don't know if he knows more about that, but that might also be helpful.
There's
Perhaps we could-
really,
Yeah, so
I'm
go
sorry.
ahead. You go
There's
ahead.
really not that much information, new information in the report to me. You know, it just says we need more research on these and these things. And otherwise it summarizes kind of the information that's out there on pyrethroids. So could be an approach to ask them for making our interest known, but it may also be a waste of time. Considering the timeline as well. I don't think, and I heard you say 25-page review. No, I don't think it is
I meant
needed
a
to.
theoretical spec. I didn't mean that as a choice that we would ever make.
Yeah. So what I could imagine, and I have no preference on this. I could also just do, you know, as a member of the public, maybe provide some detailed comments. That's fine with me as well. But I think it really links to the DISB report on water quality, you know, in certain points where I think our oversight function should kick in. And this is, you know, they're talking about potentially 15 years of research. And I think we want to make sure that that money is well spent. I mean, they haven't detailed where the funding would come from at all, but it would be our input would be important to make sure that that money is well spent and that the time is well spent and that the time and the level of and the amount of research is really needed to make these regulatory decisions or set water quality criteria for these compounds. You know, that's my biggest question here.
Thanks, Inga. Now Tanya had to restart her computer, so let's take her. She was waiting a long time to make a comment.
Oh, sorry, and my comment might have already been addressed, or I don't know. I missed a little bit there, so my apologies. But yeah, I guess one of the things I wanted to add was if we think about kind of this high level approach, we might want to also consider the extent to which this plan addresses some of the recommendations in the monitoring enterprise review that we just did. I think there's probably some connections there that could be interesting. But I guess my concern is just the time frame that we would have to do a really robust and in-depth review. And it sounds like Inga's, of course, the person who would have the most knowledge to dig in. So given the 6-week time frame that I heard, and you probably already had this discussion, it seems like we might want to prioritize more of this high-level review. And that question that Inga was focusing on was around, you know, the extent to which this can inform management decisions, or and the extent to which we can connect this, or we can assess its its connections to the recommendations we've already made, both in the water quality review and in the monitoring enterprise review. So that's all. Sorry if I missed something or if I'm repeating
No,
something.
no, that's a novel point, Tanya. I think that's good. And that was also mentioned in the letter we received. So I think you're right on target there. I understand we have a public comment on this issue, so I'd like to take that now.
Yeah, this was Deirdre Desjardins. Deirdre, you have the ability to mute your microphone.
Yeah, I wanted regarding Bob Nyman's comment and that this really should be a move to a regulation. It's actually, when I looked at all of the water quality issues in the Delta with respect to contaminants, and it includes things like DDT and DDE and PCBs, there's a lot of legacy contaminants and they haven't moved to hard regulations on any of them. And it's, I think it is as much of a social science issue as it is a science issue. And because everybody wants to delay. And I also wanted to point out that there's a global insect apocalypse where, partly due to pesticides, insect populations are plummeting globally. And I don't know if anybody, I can try and look, but I don't know if anybody studied that, but it's a huge issue for bird populations. Insectivores are declining as well. So spraying these mass quantities of herbicides and pesticides everywhere, having global impacts on ecosystem, and it may be accelerating with climate change. There's temperatures above which insects don't survive. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Deirdre. Yeah, you raise other sorts of trade-offs that might be involved in this. So yeah, plenty to think about. We are a little behind schedule, so I'm wondering if we can maybe set this aside for the moment and let Inga think about, I think you would clearly have to lead this, Inga, and then we can think about who else would like to contribute.
Yes, I would definitely like a few others to contribute. Like, for example, Bob put his finger on one of the burning issues, and whoever else, of course.
Okay, I think Bob is signaling that he's interested. Okay, so we can have people volunteer or take that up in the next round. So let me just finish my chair's report at this point. I guess this really should have been an agenda item as opposed to part of the chair's report. The last item I have is that we received 2 public comments since the last public meeting. Bob Wright provided some supplemental comments on the DEIR for the Delta Conveyance Projects. It's the Environmental Impact Report. And we appreciate that, being kept in the loop on that. And then California Water Research provided a letter about federal and state conflict of interest issues with respect to UC Climate Change Initiative grant. And so we're CC'd on that and there's no action for us. Are there any, and we thank folks for keeping us informed of these issues. And so now I just want to check if there are any public comments on any part of the chair's report.
Yeah, we have one from Deirdre Desjardins. Deirdre, you have the ability to unmute your microphone. Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to say I lost a lot of sleep over writing the letter I did about the conflict of interest issues, but they are really significant. I tried to raise them quietly and get them resolved last year with the Just Transitions grant. But this does, the reason I CC'd the Delta Independent Science Board is because you're involved in the recruitment of the next Delta lead scientist. And one of the concerns is that having a MIG, the position has always previously gone to a senior scientist, and having a mid-career scientist. Dr. Larson just got tenure in 2018. So having a mid-career scientist in the position, you know, and with all the pressure to get grants and publish and so on, it may not be a good idea. And it's a really difficult position for me to be in, but I think there's enough problems with financial influence from, you know, large water agencies in California, in water science, in the Delta. We don't need to add individual financial interests on top of that, and it's a real concern. I think you see the outcome may be that Dr. Larson is removed as a co-PI on the grant, which is really unfortunate. And I would have, if there had been any public disclosure of the proposed grant and the proposed engagement structure, we would have tried to resolve this long before. It's a lot harder. It's much easier to deal with such issues proactively. So I wanted to thank you for reading it. And I didn't do this lightly. In fact, I didn't sleep for quite a few nights, but I think it's something that's really important for scientific integrity. So thank you.
Thank you, Deirdre. And as we did discuss this somewhat last time too, and in the last meeting, I made sure to convey that we take conflict of interest very seriously, and we always want the science to be above reproach in terms of potential uses, objectivity, all that sort of thing. So we do appreciate you bringing this to our attention. Okay, well, with that, I would like to move on to agenda item 3, where we have Laura Larson providing the Delta Lead Scientist report. Is Laurel still on? There she is.
I'm here. I'm going to share my screen. Just a second. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, I just wanted to let you all know, first of all, that a copy of the latest Delta Lead Scientist report, along with the Council's legislative update and outreach highlights report, is a part of your meeting package. I also just wanted to announce that the IEP annual workshop recordings are now available, and the links are a part of your meeting materials. And in particular, I want to bring your attention to the morning plenary, which features DWR lead scientist Louise Conrad, as something that would really be of interest to the ISB members. So in her talk, Dr. Conrad references and offers some insights on how IEP can move forward with recommendations from the ISB's monitoring enterprise review. So that's a really interesting plenary, and I would recommend watching it. So I also just wanted to flag that in that Delta Lead Scientist report that you have a copy of, there's a few articles that are of interest or may be of interest to you with relevancy to the water supply reliability report that I would just draw your attention to. Now, I am going to go into a little bit more detail on one of the items reported on in the Lead Scientist report, which is an update on some of the independent review panels we are currently conducting. I'd like to give a bit of an extended report here for informational purposes only, but because some of what we're reviewing is relevant to current ISB efforts or previous recommendations made in ISB review reports. So we're currently conducting, well, before I get into that, I'd like to say that first, one of the core functions of the Delta Science program is to convene independent scientific peer reviews and advice. And these reviews are different from the reviews conducted by the Delta Independent Science Board in that they're requested of us and focus on specific scientific and technical programs, plans, and products rather than themes or programmatic areas. Our reviews involve external, independent subject matter experts that are ultimately selected by the Delta Lead Scientist, and a charge to the review panel that's developed in consultation with the requesting agency to ensure relevancy, but then finalized by the lead scientist. Depending on the review, reviews might be conducted through individual letter reviews asynchronously, or as a panel review conducted collaboratively in a public meeting. The peer review panels that we follow, that we facilitate, all follow rigorous standards to ensure the independence of the review process. And all of our best practices and policies are specified in Appendix I of the Delta Science Plan. So I'd say that in recent years, there's been a growing awareness of this service that we perform to the community and a greater number of requests for this service. And currently we're facilitating 3 reviews, 1 for the Department of Water Resources and 2 for the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation. So the first one I'm going to talk about is a review of the State Water Project Delivery Capacity Report, or DCR, which was a review requested of us by DWR. I trust that you heard a bit about that in the DMDU seminar with Dr. Andrew Schwartz last month. But this review that we are conducting addresses some of the approaches that DWR is employing that are consistent with recommendations from the Water Supply Reliability Review, as well as the effort that you heard about last month that will likely be reviewed in the ISB's decision-making under deep uncertainty review. The Delivery Capacity Report, which is the subject of this review, is issued every 2 years in order to provide the most up-to-date information about current and future, about 20 years ahead, water supply via the State Water Project. The Delivery Capacity Report is used extensively by State Water Project contractors and others to plan their water uses. DWR has requested that the Delta Science Plan convene an independent peer review of recent updates to the Delta, the Delivery Capacity Report development process that focus on improvements on how the climate change impacts are estimated. It's a review that has 2 parts, and the first evaluates the strategy for adjusting how the model uses historical hydrologic data in order to account for non-stationarity due to a changing climate. The second then is going to evaluate the use of risk-informed climate change scenarios, and these are what was discussed by Andrew Schwartz, to model future deliveries. The review work has just kicked off. I just was reviewing drafts of the first letters just the other day, and we expect that the review letters from 3 independent reviewers are going to be available in fall of 2023. And so I'll provide another update to you when those are available. Now, the last 2 reviews that we're currently conducting are both requested by the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation. And the first one, this water temperature monitoring platform peer review, is one that I have reported to you on previously because it is a 2-part review. So for those of you who weren't on the board at the time, I'm sure you're aware that temperature management has long been a key parameter for protection of species like Chinook salmon, particularly here at the southern end of its range. It's also one of the most challenging goals for reservoir operations for the Central Valley Project managed by the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation. Reclamation has developed a water temperature modeling platform to assist resource managers of major Central Valley Project reservoirs with balancing water resources for downstream uses and temperature needs. So back in 2022, an independent peer review panel convened by the Delta Science Program initiated this 2-part review and its application to some of the tributaries within the Central Valley Project. And following up on a July 2022 meeting exactly a year ago, that panel produced its report to Reclamation last September, and it's available on our peer review website. Part 2 of the review by the same panel is soon to occur at a public meeting in September 2023, with a final report due in October 2023. The final review covers application of the water temperature modeling platform to a different set of tributaries within the Central Valley Project system than those covered by the midterm review. And it will also look at implementation of the recommendations issued in part 1 of the review. And then the final review that we're conducting also for Reclamation is a review of fish and aquatic effects analysis, and I'll explain what that means. And it refers to the fact that long-term operations of the Central Valley Project and State Water Project require compliance with the Endangered Species Act to avoid putting endangered species in jeopardy of extinction. Changes to the strategy for long-term operations requires, under Section 7 of the Endangered Species Act, consultation about whether the proposed changes might cause effects to listed species or critical habitats not analyzed in the current U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and National Marine Fisheries Service biological opinions. As part of a reinitiation of this consultation, Reclamation is developing a fish and aquatic effects analysis, which will be a portion of the environmental impact statement mandated by the National Environmental Policy Act. The fish and aquatic effects analysis will in turn inform a biological assessment, which U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and NMFS will evaluate to determine whether modifications to the long-term operations will jeopardize listed species, and hence whether the proposed modifications are acceptable under federal law. The intent of this review is to evaluate the approach and methods adopted by Reclamation to assess how the long-term operations affect the aquatic environment and the exposure, response, and risk to select Endangered Species Act listed species. This review panel consists of 5 experts who will review the project's materials and produce a panel letter review of the fish and aquatic effects analysis. Some of the approaches to participatory scenario development that will be reviewed through this effort might be of interest to the decision-making under deep uncertainty review. So I just wanted to call that to your attention. And then also to make you aware of the timeline. That review process is anticipated to start in early fall, and the letter review will be available in late 2023. And I'll just say that for all of these 3 reviews, all of the materials are readily accessible to the public. Review materials and panel member bios are posted on the Council's peer review website under the scientific peer review dropdown for the Delta Science program. So any questions on those reviews or their potential relevancy to anything you're considering? And since I am sharing my screen, I can't see if hands are raised, so I'll rely on Lisa to help me there.
I don't see any hands, but I welcome any questions folks have. Just a quick one, just a quick comment, really. It is nice to see the DWR taking a closer look at non-stationarity, and we really look forward to seeing how that translates into potential changes. And you said there was a link to the fish and aquatic effects analysis. You didn't say exactly which operations were being evaluated, but I assume there's some synergy there between water operations and what the fish and aquatic effects may be. So maybe those two can,
yeah, that definite synergy there, and that's going to be evaluated through this review process.
Great, that's good to hear. It looks like we have a public comment on this, so let's go ahead and take that at this point.
Yep, it's from Deirdre Desjardins. And Deirdre, you have the ability to unmute your microphone.
Yeah, the State Water Project delivery capability report and the methodology for it is a major concern for NGO and fishing groups that advocate in the Delta. And I'm wondering when there's an opportunity for, in the network of climate groups that I work with, and I'm wondering when there's an opportunity for those groups to provide information for that review.
The reviews typically don't involve a public comment process, but all public meetings held in association with the review process are open.
That's not correct. Actually, California Water Research did provide information on the aquatic species peer review in 2018. So I'm not sure why that would have changed.
So it depends on the type of review that we're conducting. The delivery capacity review report, as requested by Reclamation, is a letter review only. So it's a little bit like reviewing journal articles. We have We have 3 selected reviewers who review the documents. They do have a chance to hear a presentation from Reclamation, but they will be providing individual letter reviews. But for other types of reviews, we do have public meetings.
I'm actually, I'm concerned about a peer review that doesn't allow people to provide references, and particularly because I just spent a year, like practically 24/7, reading a climate literature, and non-stationarity is a huge issue, and it's really clear that the CMIP 5 models don't capture it, and it's not well understood in the climate adaptation.
We could certainly offer to
communities.
WR to relay an interest in the public commenting. And I will say that the reviewers that were selected are quite prominent climate scientists, but I could certainly relay that.
Yeah, and also, is it possible to know who's on the committee? So there's a planning committee for the review, and it would be helpful to know. I know DWR is often is on the committee, but who to know. We've called for disclosure of who's on the planning committees for these reviews.
I will, we will be able to provide a web link to our independent scientific review website, and all of that information is available there.
When I looked for it for others, there wasn't. The planning committee has typically not been listed, and we've been trying to get the members of the planning committee listed on there. So I can follow up, but I think it's really important because they are collaboratively planned reviews. So it's very different than like the health and safety code 5004. So that there is a process that the water board is legally required to go through, where they have University of California independently select folks, and then the people who are producing the report aren't actively involved in selecting the reviewers. So that's an important consideration.
Yeah, thank you. I will say DWR requested this review independently. There's no planning committee. And the 3 reviewers are Daniel Feldman, who is with Lawrence Berkeley Laboratory, John Herman at UC Davis, and Ruby Lang at PNNL.
Okay, thanks for your comments, Deirdre. Let's let Laurel finish her report out on the other stuff. Thanks.
Okay, so the next item I wanted to report on is recruitment of the ISB member who will fulfill Steve Brandt's position. That recruitment process is now underway. And I have a brief timeline here for you to see. So the 14th is today. I'm going to be seeking feedback from you all on the way that the solicited expertise is worded. And I've already received some comments from Lisa Wanger and Steve Brandt. So thank you about that. Thank you, Edmund. I didn't realize the screen sharing had ended earlier. Looking at it on my computer. And then we plan to release the recruitment flyer in 10 days with the finalized language. The applications will be due a little after mid-August, and then we expect to conduct candidate interviews through the month of September, arrive at a selected member by the end of September, and then seek council approval of the selected candidate in their October meeting. So I have a brief request to you today, and one is to submit suggestions for potential candidates to me. You could email them to me or Edmund, CC all of us by the 23rd, the day before this recruitment flyer goes out, and we'll make sure that the flyer reaches those targeted individuals. And then please help us broadly advertise the position once the flyer is released. So what I wanted to seek feedback on you today are two things that are in the recruitment flyer. One is the opening statement. The Delta Stewardship Council is seeking a prominent scientist with expertise in fish ecology to serve on the Delta Independent Science Board, which provides oversight of the science underlying decision-making for the California's Sacramento San Joaquin Delta. So this is the first thing that they will see before they delve into the details. And then a little bit later on, we have a paragraph describing a little bit more specifically the expertise that's being solicited. The incumbent should have expertise in quantitative fish ecology, experience working at an ecosystem level and evaluating the effects of environmental drivers, such as restoration, water operations.
Yeah, Laura, we needed to advance the slides, and I think Edmund's trying to get the format right. So just if you could just pause for 1 sec while we do that.
Edmund, would you like me to go back to screen sharing? I could easily do that as well.
Sure, that might be helpful. Sorry.
Okay, will do. Here we go. Okay. So the incumbent should have expertise in quantitative fish ecology, experience working at an ecosystem level and evaluating the effects of environmental drivers such as restoration, water operations, or changing climate on fishes is desirable. Any thoughts or comments or suggested tweaks on this language that we're using in order to solicit the needed expertise? And I thank Steve. Steve already had some really good suggestions on that expertise sentence. Tom, I do see you have a hand up.
Yeah, I wonder if it could be worded a little more broadly, because there could be fish ecologists who are more hydrologists than ecologists. Does that make sense to you?
I would invite Steve to comment on that, because I know that one of the modifications that Steve had made was to add that word quantitative in there. So I think this is maybe an important point for the board to discuss, whether you think it would be more appropriate for the solicitation to be broader, potentially including people who might consider themselves eco-hydrologists, or narrower as written here.
Yeah, I mean, we've spent a fair amount of time talking about functional flows, and it just seems to me it could cover that a little better. But I'd be interested in what Steve has to say.
Thanks, Tom. I'm not sure what a fish hydrologist is or does, and so I would definitely avoid that word at all possible. You would only get be lucky if you get any applications. I think the important words that I added were more along the lines of experience working at an ecosystem level, and then looking at these various drivers and impacts on fish, because that by implication requires that they are used to working in a multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary environment. And I think that, and that could be working with climate people, hydrologists, or others. But clearly on this board, the ability to work with others in other disciplines is really important. If one were to have a fish biologist who works on the in taxonomy on the second fin of a fish, that may not be the type of person you're looking for in terms of a fish person. But I think and to me, fish ecology, and I think it's true in the basic fish world, means interactions with fish, physical biological interactions with fish. That's what ecology refers to, as opposed to fish taxonomy or fish physiology or something like that. Ecology is the broad term. Anyway, that's my thought. So
yeah. Now, I'm not an ecologist, and seeing ecosystem there would resonate better with me as a broader advertisement. What I'm thinking is I listened to the 3 talks in the plenary session at the IEP, and I think it was Jay who talked about the problem being one problem, not hydrologic and ecosystem. And so the more integrated we are on the board with our folks, it would seem the better. I agree with Jay's perspective.
Yeah, I think maybe that second sentence probably does cover some of what you're thinking, Tom. Maybe, maybe we just all read it a little differently, but I think that second sentence makes it clear that you're looking at interactions. So
you could modify that second sentence a little bit when it says drivers such as restoration, water operations, and changing climate. Instead of water operations, you could say flow, water flow, or hydrological conditions, as a driver.
Mhm.
And that would broaden it. Water operations is a fairly, you're not looking at how fish reacts to water operations. You're looking at how water operations changes the hydrodynamics and flow, which therefore affect fish. And so maybe broadening that water operations term would be a good way to do it.
Yeah.
I would be supportive of changing it to flow. Yeah.
yeah, sounds good. Okay, let's hear from some others too. Anna.
I wonder a little bit whether we're mixing position descriptions versus sort of decision criteria for choosing among candidates. One of the things that I think is most important from my brief experience working on the board is that we need scientists who can take a high level view and see interfaces between their scientific expertise and that of others. And this ability to work across interfaces across disciplines is really critical. And I think the style of collaborative work that we do is incredibly important. And I worry a little bit if we're very specific in the description, we may end up with a very small number of candidates that scientifically might hit the bullseye, but might not be optimal in terms of these other characteristics, which I would argue are equally important for being effective in this role. And so from my perspective, I would be in favor of broadening the description as much as sort of the outer bounds of what would be acceptable from those who are more in this area. And then, of course, we can use more specific scientific fit as one of the criteria for the final selection. But there are other criteria that we want to use for the final selection, or the broader we want to use for the final selection, that are not in these sentences, but that are more about the type of person we're looking. So I just want to make sure we don't end up with 3 candidates and sort of pigeonhole ourselves a little bit too much.
Thanks for that comment, Anna. And my response to that is that what we're looking at here is just a small excerpt of the recruitment flyer. And one of the additions to the flyer that we're pretty deliberate about adding this year is detailing the 5 criteria that are being used to evaluate candidates. And that emphasizes their experience in working in interdisciplinary environments with applied resource management type questions, evidence of impact of their publication record, and so on. So those criteria are detailed, which answers one part of your comment. And I think that the part of your comment that maybe isn't addressed is ensuring that we cast the expertise net broadly enough. And I think that's
exactly right. And if if you have the luxury of a fire hose of people who are seeking to be in this position, then of course you can be extremely selective, both on the scientific context of the person's work and on the other criteria that you just mentioned. But at least for me, I don't see the harm in having this part be somewhat broader, so that we avoid the risk of sort of preemptively narrowing the field scientifically to a degree that is,
Anna, could I ask you to say, oh, sorry, Anna, you're breaking up a little, so I didn't mean to interrupt you. Could you suggest which word you think is narrowing this? Because to me, this does sound pretty broad.
Well, I think going back to some of the comments that Tom was making, although I have to think about it. I do better thinking writing than speaking. But I guess for those who are more in this sub area, based on this description of the expertise, how many candidates do we think we're going to get? I guess one comment I had earlier before Tom even spoke was, can we make it explicit that we don't expect that this experience necessarily be working in the Delta system? I think that because it's the Delta specific position, that's something that hasn't always been clear. And I know that we welcome people whose expertise or whose experiences in other systems, but maybe that would be at least one way to make breadth a little bit clear.
I do think that is clear in the full recruitment flyer, where we state that in one of the criteria that experience working in complex systems relevant to or similar to the Delta is what we're looking for, but it doesn't have to be the Delta. And in fact, I would say we're starting to compile a list of specific individuals to reach out to, and many of them are outside the Delta. I think.
Yeah, I think you have a lot of hands up now. Inga is next.
Yeah.
Thank you. I definitely support the change from water operations to hydrological conditions or flow. I think that's much more general than what water operations. And I was just wondering, and this is a question for Steve, do we really need the quantitative in quantitative fish ecology, or would fish ecology be a little bit broader? Because we've been talking about making it broader.
I guess my view, and I'm not going to be here, so but I do have some concern about making sure you guys get a good candidate. I personally think you're going to get more candidates than you can deal with. You know, if you had this sort of an advertisement, I think you would get quite a few candidates. I'd be surprised if you didn't get a lot. I actually stuck the word quantitative in there from the original draft that was sent to me. I believe I did, and it's to make it more. I keep harping on taxonomist, but taxonomist or an individual physiologist or something like that. The fish world is huge, and there's 3,000 people that attend the annual Fishery Society meeting, you know, and so it's a very broad field, and the quantitative fish ecology, I think, will help to narrow it down. Does it narrow it too much? I wouldn't think so. I think the next sentence is probably is more narrow. The one that says is desirable, but I think, I think Laurel and I have had the benefit of seeing the full description, which is, and I'm going to read this, which is what is required in the Delta Reform Act, be a nationally or internationally prominent scientist with appropriate expertise to evaluate the broad range of scientific programs that support adaptive management in the Delta. That's sort of the overarching criteria for the person. So, and I think the board itself can do a good job at recruiting. I don't know how many applications you got for the last go around, Laurel, and if there's any lessons to learn in that. I mean, did you get hundreds and hundreds, or maybe you can't say that, but anyway, that's just my view, but you can take it or leave it.
I would say we got a highly appropriate number of applications for the last go around. I wouldn't have wanted more. I wouldn't have wanted less. And I do feel that this scope is appropriately broad and appropriately narrow as well. I think I'm pretty happy with this, but definitely would like your continued comments as well.
Okay, let's see what Bob,
Yeah.
Well, Laurel and all, I like this description, and I think it is broad enough to capture the attention of the kinds of people that we would like to see apply. And and I agree with Steve and Inga and some of the others who have said that, changing that word from or the phrase from water operations to water flows or something along those lines, I think that would be a good change. But basically, I think you're going to get plenty of applications from very good people. And I think also that the board really needs somebody that's quantitative. We don't need somebody who is not right now. And I think it will attract very good candidates. So anyway, I like it the way it is. And I'm sure the flyer, fills in a lot of the questions that people might have about the position. So that's my thoughts.
Okay, well, Laurel, do you want to go ahead and keep calling? You seem to be able to see the hands now. So Virginia has her hand up.
Okay, so I agree with everything that Bob just said. And I have two specific word suggestions which would help in my mind, both under the details. One is to say experience working collaboratively and at the ecosystem level. And then the other is in the next phrase to say effects on fish and their habitats.
Can I just say, I appreciate that, Virginia, and I like some of those changes, but I also know some quantitative fish modelers who are going to say, what does ecosystem level mean? So I know we're trying to be general, but I wonder if maybe there's a way to just, I think you're talking about ecosystem drivers or, I think you can mention ecosystem more directly related to this idea of you want to link it to habitat or you want to link it to different drivers. So maybe there's a way to combine my comment with Virginia's. So not just say at an ecosystem level, but explain more what you mean by that.
I was muted. Thank you. Any other comments?
Well, I must say, I don't even understand Lisa's comment because the fish ecologist I know would understand that. So anyway, explore that further. I don't know what Steve or Bob have to say about that, but anyway.
Any comments from Steve or Bob?
I didn't understand the point that Virginia was making, so I guess I have no comment right now.
But Virginia, could you say what the first part of what you said, experience working?
Okay. Well, I understood Lisa suggested rewording, asking someone with experience working at an ecosystem level, because she thought fish biologists wouldn't understand that. And I didn't understand her comment of that. So maybe this is getting too picky, but anyway.
I think it is, obviously I helped edit this, so I'm perfectly happy with it from a fish point of view. And you got to remember you're looking for fish people, and I'm not sure. Other than I love the water operations suggestions, maybe not flow. I would even argue hydrodynamics or something more general like that, because nobody works on flows on fish. I can tell you that from our review, and but hydrodynamics they do.
And I think someone said hydrologic conditions, which is probably even broader, and I like that as well, because it's not necessarily just the hydrodynamics, but it's a little bit of a broader ecosystem context.
Just to defend my statement a little, there's some people who don't find ecosystem level to be specific enough in terms of scale or scope. And so they might wonder if the fact that they integrate benthic organisms is ecosystem level, or whether you need to be modeling a huge watershed to be at the ecosystem level. So I happen to know some very persnickety modelers who I know will wonder what that means.
Yeah, and I agree. And I think that's part of who we're looking for. So.
And just to make sure I'm clear, if we don't use ecosystem level, what's the preferred alternative here?
Well, I think you could say ecosystem, but just not ecosystem level is what I was suggesting. And so that you would say incorporates ecosystem effects such as, or incorporates broad scales, or just what do you exactly mean by ecosystem level is the issue.
Would replacing the word level by scale fix your
No.
concern, Lisa, or is it something different?
What about perspective?
I think perspective could work. Yeah.
When I put in ecosystem, I meant that they are dealing with interactions of fish with their physical and biological environment, and that's what I would interpret as ecosystem. I've had this conversation with Jay, and his definition of ecosystem as a hydrologist is quite a bit different than mine. And but we're not looking for a hydrologist, we're looking for a fish guy. And I know Lisa's is quite a bit different than mine. We've had this conversation, and but I'm not sure we're looking at the Lisa level definition of ecosystem, as appropriate as it may be for certain
I don't
people.
know what my definition is, but I think we're actually in violent agreement, because I'm just saying that when I was interpreting ecosystem exactly as you just said it. So looking at the effects of environmental drivers. So the point is, you could just say, when we say, you could reword this sentence in such a way that you say ecosystem effects, including interactions with, I don't know what restoration means, wetland restoration, any kind of restoration, hydrologic conditions, and changing climates, just that is what I thought you meant by ecosystem. Anyway,
It's not an absolute
micromanaging
characteristic. It's a desirable quality. And I think if you get a bunch of fish people apply, would you or not, I'm going to talk to Laurel, prefer the ones who have worked at the ecosystem level versus not, because it's a desirable quality, not an essential quality.
Okay, well, I think Laurel probably has enough to work with here.
I have a
so-
lot of material here. I'm gonna give this a stab, and maybe I will circle back with Lisa and Steve in the very near future.
All right.
At least on
if you
the sentences we're
ask us to
looking at.
wordsmith, we will. Okay, so now Laurel, do you have any other
I do have
components?
one quick other thing, which is that this is here, I'll just get out of this slideshow. But the other announcement, you're not seeing my screen anymore, are you? Or are you?
You're still sharing.
Okay.
You are still sharing.
There we go. Okay, now you shouldn't be. Just one other quick announcement, which is that at your next meeting, we would like to present an overview of the effort on identifying grand challenges that the Delta Science program will be using to help inform the update to the Delta Science Plan. This is something I mentioned back in my report to you in May, but we do want to agendize that at the next meeting. We will be sharing a document, a brief 2-page document with you all to review before the meeting to prepare for this conversation. But the reason we want to reach out to the ISB while embarking on this process is that the grand challenges that we identified were informed by Delta ISB reviews. Some of the previous grand challenges written about by former Delta lead scientists and other sources. And we're really going to be using this as a structural mechanism to shape the next Delta Science Plan. And so it's an appropriate time for us to seek feedback. And that's all.
That sounds great, Laurel. Thank you for inviting us to contribute to that. Edmund, do we have any public comments?
Yes, we have one from Deirdre Desjardins. Deirdre, you have the ability to unmute your microphone. Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to say with respect to the fish ecologist to replace Steve Brandt, my perception is that the Delta Independent Science Board really needs someone with local knowledge of the Delta, and flow alteration is actually a major I think the Delta may be more flow altered than a lot of other estuaries. And there are a lot of California researchers who've done research on the effects of flow alterations. And John Holland and others at UC Davis did a study where they found water projects had major impact on phytoplankton in the base of the food web. So I am continually wanting to provide more background and synthesize work, and it's not something I can keep up with, but losing Jay Lund and Jim Klern and others with really the deep knowledge that comes from working on the Delta for decades. I think you really need to, I really would hope that you would look at trying to replace some of that knowledge. So thank you.
Thank you, Deirdre. I think that is an important point, that the board is meant to balance local and outsider knowledge. So thank you for that. Okay, I just want to give folks a heads up that we are substantially behind schedule on our agenda. So we'll either have to cut some things from the agenda or run late. So if folks can think about whether they have the ability to stay late, please keep that in mind. I already know some of you cannot. Hopefully we can maintain a quorum. We can evaluate that as we go forward. This meeting was originally blocked out for longer. Edmund was optimistic, but we have a lot to say apparently. So why don't we go ahead and take a 10-minute break, and maybe we'll check in with folks about whether they can stay a little bit later and find out if we can maintain a quorum. Okay, thank you. Also come back at 10 roughly.
So Lisa or Edmund, I will have to leave at 12:25 sharp. Okay.
Got
Did
it.
you hear?
Yes.
Thanks.
Okay, and then we're losing Bob Nyman too. Is there anyone else that would not be able to stay past the scheduled time through the 12:30 Pacific time, 3:30 East Coast time?
And I think there's potential for some of the agenda items to go faster, like food webs. That one will be much briefer than we scheduled.
Okay, well, we'll hope. I don't think DMDU is going to be briefer though, is the problem. Yeah. So it might even go over. So I'm a little worried. Okay, all right, we'll see.
Yeah. Whenever you're ready, let us know, and Lisa will resume the meeting. Thank you.
Okay, Madam Chair, we are recording and broadcasting.
Thanks. Welcome back to the Delta Independent Science Board meeting. I see Tom has a hand up. Tom, what have you got to
Lisa,
say?
I was wondering if you want to reorder things because of the our losing people.
Okay, that's a good point. Next up, we do have the food webs, so that's one of the people we'll be losing. What others? I think those probably is the most important thing to cover before we lose anybody. Is there something else specific you had in mind?
Well, I don't know who else is leaving.
Well, it's just Steve and Bob that have to leave.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think we're okay then.
Okay, all right. So let's get to our discussion of the food webs review. I'll turn it over to Steve.
Thanks, Lisa. I'll be very quick. I think we'll gain some time. I am having intermittent internet issues, so I may disappear. Let me just bring everyone up to date on where we stand on the timeline of the food web review. As all of you know, we're having a workshop. That workshop is now scheduled for November. I think it's the 8th and 9th. And the timeline for this will be in August. We will give the board a reasonably detailed outline of that workshop. And that's for public discussion as well as board discussion, hopefully approval of that in August. By September, we hope to have filled out all of the speakers and so forth, and that will be the time we would announce it to folks and begin invitations and so forth for people to attend and try and jury up support for that. The workshop itself will be a combination of is intended to be a combination of plenary speakers and regular speakers and lightning talks, panels, as well as breakout groups. In general, the we do plan to have a section that'll bring in examples of how food web modeling or food web kind of understanding and is being applied for management issues in other large ecosystems, such as the Chesapeake, the Columbia River, the Great Lakes, and in particular, there's a couple of others, Northern Gulf of Mexico, as we outlined in the prospectus. We plan to address and ask the question, what are the key fisheries management issues and key ecosystem management issues in the Delta, where an upper trophic level food web approach is critical to predict responses to management actions or changes in environmental drivers. We also plan to look at various types of new tools and new modeling approaches, and ask the question, or what models or tools might be most effective in the Delta, and what are the best space and time scales, and what are the data needs. That's sort of a very quick breakdown of what the overall 2-day workshop is intended to be. We plan to also produce a white paper that'll be available well before the workshop for workshop participants. And then once the workshop is over, we'll be writing up a full board review on this topic based on all the input we've received. Bob, do you have anything to add to that?
I think you did a great job, Steve, as usual, and I think it's going to be an outstanding workshop, especially if we can get all the participants and speakers that we talked about, we've talked about in the last few weeks, and especially yesterday. So I'm really looking forward to it. Nothing new to add, really.
I guess we'll take questions, and if there are any.
I have
not,
one.
Lee. Sure.
So I'm thinking about how Inga was phrasing the questions for the permethroid review, and when you said you're going to be looking at the tools that are most effective for the Delta, I'm wondering if the implication is for the kinds of management questions. So I think Inga had that first question, which is just, is the science going to answer management questions, was the gist of it. Is that how you're thinking about effectiveness?
Yeah, the first day is largely devoted to identifying those fundamental fisheries management or ecosystem management questions for the Delta, where this sort of approach might be valuable. And then the second day, we would dive into the types of tools that are available, the new stuff on the horizon and stuff like that, and say, given the questions and given all these tools, what would be the most appropriate for the Delta? Okay, that concludes our report.
Okay, thanks, Steve. We'll move on to the next item.
Public comment.
Oh, sorry, public comment. Thank you. Are there any public comments?
There are none.
Okay, got off easy that time. Okay. Now, the next topic is the discussion and potential action on the decision-making under deep uncertainty review prospectus. So this is a potential action item where we may be choosing to accept the revised prospectus. That was part of your package. And what I'd like to do with this time slot is go through the public comments and summarize how we responded to them. And then hear from the board if they have any other concerns or if they think we've adequately addressed the public comments. So Edmund has the tracked changes version of the prospectus available for sharing. Let's not start reading that. Let me go through quickly what some of the issues are that maybe aren't shown here, and then we'll have some comments for each of the commenters. But I just want to be clear that we combine multiple comments sometimes in the changes we made in the prospectus. So there isn't a one-to-one correspondence between what someone said and changes we made. So it may be a matter of we have to talk about how we responded and then look at the changes overall. Okay, so first of all, we really appreciated that we got quite a lot of thoughtful comments that we definitely used to modify the prospectus. And some of the comments were really beyond the prospectus in that we really need to take these into consideration all throughout our discussion of the scenarios that we're reviewing, the interviews we're planning, and writing the report. So these questions will continue to, or these comments rather, will continue to inform what we do throughout the process. We have received 3 comments that provided additional sources of scenarios because we are reviewing scenarios. So that's in the appendix. Lisa Lucas of USGS, Laurel Larson, who we all know, and Brett Milligan of UC Davis provided additional suggestions that we've added to now this Appendix A. Now I'm just going to go through the individual comments. You all received copies. Francis Coates wrote about the importance of making sure decision processes were public processes. And I regret if it wasn't clear from our prospectus that we completely agree that involving stakeholders is critical. And decision-making under deep uncertainty is not science done in a vacuum, but it's intended to meaningfully engage stakeholders, since one of the characteristics of DMDU is that stakeholders don't necessarily agree on the outcomes of future changes. And so you really do have to do what people call adjudicating risk, which is find the commonalities and figure out how to address and prioritize which risks are being addressed. So we did make some changes in response to that to clarify. And then we had some comments from John Helly, who mentions that this work is similar to prior work and finds the prospectus unfocused and unclear as to what we will do. And he mentioned similar work in aerospace and defense industries, including failure analysis, being similar and potentially, similar. Okay, so yes, DMDU, decision-making under deep uncertainty, is certainly not completely novel, and similar decision tools have extensive application in many types of engineering. That's absolutely true. But nonetheless, we think this project will bring some useful tools to light, whatever we call them, because I think there are some potential differences in terms of what DMDU brings versus, say, failure analysis. I'm not familiar with everything that's been applied in these fields, but part of it is emphasizing the stakeholder engagement, just as I just spoke of, that there's almost a democratic aspect to DMDU in that stakeholders are included to identify risks and formulate plans. So we'll certainly consider these comments, and we did add a little bit of specifics. I think a prospectus is really meant to be a broad scope and not super specific, but we do take into consideration that we should have clear products and clear methods, and we will absolutely carry that through in our final report. I think I would just go through all the comments in this manner, but if folks want to add a response to anything in particular at the time I'm making it, I'd say raise your hand, but otherwise I'll just try to get through all the comments and then turn it over to other board members for comments, unless somebody wants to object to that process right now. No objection seen. Okay. The next comment was from Alejo Cross Polk. Hope I'm saying that right. So this comment had to do with the fact that the DISB could consider and review post-normal science as a decision-making and problem-solving strategy that is highly applicable to the Delta context. And I agree, this is a useful concept, this post-normal science. And I would argue that DMDU is a type of post-normal science. So first, let me do my best to try to define post-normal science. It is a rather broad concept, but I did co-edit a book on ecological economics back in the early 1990s, where Silvio Funtowitz, who's one of the founders of this idea, published some of his work on that topic. And my understanding based on editing that book was that post-normal science goes beyond sort of our traditional technical and engineering approaches for problems and looks at problems more broadly, where system uncertainties or decision stakes are high. And I think that's just really analogous to DMDU. We can call it whatever we want, but I think we're both saying the same thing, that we want to emphasize diverse stakeholder perspectives and what some people call transdisciplinary research tools. And we certainly appreciate you sharing this concept of post-normal science with us, because I do think it is highly complementary. All right, next comment is from Michael Whitehead. He brings up some very important points about trade-offs. So he says it's important for the public to be informed about the cost associated with DMDU, as well as the potential benefits it can bring in terms of improved resource management, reduced risks, enhanced resilience to uncertain conditions. And I think he's primarily talking about how you might respond to the DMDU results in terms of potential costs and benefits. And he suggests using environmental economics and benefit cost analysis as a tool to weigh these trade-offs. So I think these are absolutely critical questions. And what do you do with DMDU? I mean, and I hope I'm reading the letter correctly, because you could also make the same case about even using and applying DMDU. If it's going to be time consuming, are those efforts worth doing? But I think he's more focused on as we understand sources of extreme risk or try to protect against deep uncertainties, what are the financial implications of addressing them? And those are very tough questions, but I do think it's important to emphasize that DMDU is not about building fortresses that will protect against all potential outcomes. It's really about looking for cost-effective ways to address risk and deciding how much you're willing to spend based on the ability to reduce risk and things like that. So,
and Lisa?
Yes?
I would just add to that too, that DMDU is not mutually exclusive to other types of decision-making tools like cost-benefit analysis, that the implementation of it doesn't preclude using other tools to assess what your best options are for future management or policymaking. So just to tie in with what you're saying there.
Yeah, thanks. I think that's absolutely true. But we did make some changes in the prospectus to try to address this concern and clarify these same things that I'm saying orally. Okay, we only have 2 more comments, but the next 2 are substantive. So the next one is from Dick Norgard, a former board member and an ecological economist. And he made several he made points about 6 substantive issues. The first issue was a slight wording change, which we've made, but these 6 substantive issues covered some big thoughts. So his point number 2 was he sees a major potential benefit of applying DMDU as the ability to open the minds of scientists and decision makers and possibly stakeholders and the broader public, particularly when times and systems are changing. So he wants us to consider the degree to which DMDU succeeds at this mind expansion and what might be done to promote it. I'm going to go through all his points and not try to respond to all of them individually. His third point was that risks in the prospectus are not defined in terms of whose risks. His point 4 was what sorts of decisions can realistically be supported by DMDU, and he mentions challenges of complex ecological and human systems. Point 5 was ultimately, will things be represented in terms of economic values when plans are tested for robustness? And so he brings up an important point about how do we judge outcomes? Point 6 was we need to simultaneously consider evaluating the past and potential uses of DMDU along with the potential limitations of the tool. And point 7 is that our scenarios shouldn't be too localized, that scenarios from elsewhere probably can be useful for building processes related to the Delta throughout California or even the world. So I think all of these points are really useful to think about. And these are, like I said, these are largely deep questions that we can try to address to the extent possible. We have made some minor changes to the prospectus, such as explaining that risk may be defined in multiple ways and from multiple perspectives. There's no one way to define that. And these other useful comments are going to be used to be incorporated to the extent possible as we conduct our interviews and develop our report. And I just think he's given us a lot of food for thought. And we can't just quickly respond to that, but we will definitely be thinking about it. And then the final comment we got was from Department of Water Resources. And the main comments, there were 3 main comments. We find the scope of the review has a disproportionate focus on low probability, high consequence events. To achieve the most utility to reducing risk, the Delta ISB should emphasize examination of current systems and infrastructure and when their performance deteriorates. Point number 2, the Delta ISB might consider including an examination of forecasting abilities for different types of risk. And point number 3 was the risk assessment approaches and scenarios should be considered at the scale of the Central Valley, not just the Delta, because management approaches upstream of the Delta will ultimately affect the Delta. So all good points. We did not intend to only emphasize low probability, high consequence events. And we have made some changes to the prospectus to clarify that in terms of including concepts of forecasting when feasible. But DMDU tools by design are intended to look across diverse conditions, probable, improbable, and unknowable, to compare systems or plans performance when performance deteriorates. So while we understand that there is a way that things are done now, I think it is also possible that we are looking at tools that differ from how things are done now, and they may raise a lot of challenging questions about how to incorporate them. So we added information about stress testing, which is a component of DMDU, which does specifically evaluate when performance deteriorates. And this is a very accessible part of DMDU, and then it can be incorporated usually without making any major changes to analytic techniques. Obey also was very instrumental in responding to these comments, and he pointed out that there's really a progression in the nature of uncertainties in future scenarios, and that even though forecasting should be used where possible, at some point it may not be possible to assess outcomes, particularly in these black swan events, and stakeholders still need guidance about how to handle this other range. So we look forward to just having more conversations about the potential benefits or harms of changing how risk is conceived, measured, and used to support decisions. So while we understand why they made the comment, we also think it's important to take other perspectives. The second point was easy. We did incorporate where we could this aspect of including forecasting abilities. Obviously, we have the ability to forecast, we could use it, but we are primarily exploring things that we are not able to forecast well. So we'll do what we can to differentiate that. And then we just agreed with the third point that the Central Valley is relevant to the objectives, and we'll definitely aim to include stressors throughout the system in our scenarios. So with that, I open it up to anyone else who wants to comment. I know board members have had a copy of the track changes version. We can quickly go through that now, but if folks think we haven't fully addressed these, we'd like to hear. Yes, Tom.
Maybe I could phrase it as a question. Are you going to be considering events that are not linked to climate change?
We certainly hope so. Yeah, it's easiest to give examples from climate change because those examples have a lot of people are familiar now with the effects of climate change effects on the system, but we are, in our mind, the scope is beyond that. But we're also somewhat limited in terms of someone has to have done something that we can talk about either through the seminar series or through the scenarios, and we're waiting to see what we find.
Yeah, I don't think there's a problem in California finding non-climate change disasters. I think it would be helpful to put some words in the text that indicate it's more than climate change. Because when I reread the report, I still had the feeling it was focused pretty much on climate change. And I think it's really important for California to keep its eye on the ball, that there's a lot more than climate change going on out here.
Okay, that's interesting to hear. We do have some words that expand the scope, but I think all the examples are climate change examples.
Yeah.
So that may be what causes that perception. Should we maybe remove some of the examples? Because I think that, you know, we do have the language. I don't know. Does anyone else have any thoughts about how to address Tom's comment?
I would just say, look at the examples and think about the balance.
I do think including the arc storm example may have been a particular turning point in terms of people thinking we were doing a certain thing. We intended that to make DMDU more accessible, and also to show the potential benefits. But
well, ironically, I think when ArcStorm was conceived and planned out, I don't think climate change was on the radar. But now, if you talk about ArcStorm, people are going to think about climate change. So.
That's true. Yeah, and we did try to describe that. But first, they were just using historic data, and then they added in, now they're trying to add in
but
exacerbation.
Like one obvious disaster in the Delta would be an earthquake with its epicenter right in the Delta. I mean, the levee failures would be massive and create some of the scenarios you end up with California's water supply being disrupted for a year or so.
Okay, maybe that could be an example we add to better balance things. Tanya?
Yeah. And DWR has thought about that too. So it's not like.
I know we want to get to. Okay, I know we want to get to Virginia, but it looked like Tanya wanted to respond.
Yeah, just in response. I mean, I feel like we might be nitpicking a little too much here. If you look at the second paragraph of the current prospectus, it says, starting from the current planning assumptions, these approaches use decision science tools to compare performance of management options under extreme or unpredictable events such as those related to climate change, ecosystem processes, and human behavior. I guess it seems like that should be enough to kind of trigger that we're not looking at just climate change, but yeah, because we could wordsmith this forever and not get to the actual report work.
Yeah. No, I agree. You can wordsmith forever, but when I read it this time, it just seemed to have that bias towards climate change. And if you think of the comments you got, like when I was listening to the description of Dick Norgard's comments, they were all focused on climate change kind of things.
Yeah, I think we just didn't want to get out in front of our skis in terms of an example, you know, that we weren't sure we were going to find any meat on. So, but we could certainly think of a lot of examples. But
yeah, there's no shortage.
Yeah. Maybe we can add something about earthquakes as an example, and then we might solve this problem. Yeah. Okay, let's move on to Virginia's comment.
So Lisa, I think you did a really good job of covering the issues and raising the response. And in listening to you, and I did not read the report with this in mind, but it occurred to me, there's all this lingo and specialized terms, and some of us should read the report with attention to, are we really defining terms accurately? Maybe even have a small glossary or something, because there's a lot of terminology in here and we want to be inclusive. So that's my comment. And I don't even know how applicable it is, but I just kind of, listening to you, I thought about it.
Yeah, clearly a lot of the commenters were pointing out similarities of these concepts with other things that are called different things. And yeah, it's a general problem, right? Every discipline has its own words, and yeah, we may or may not be able to solve that, but we could do our best to try to crosswalk some of these terms. Yeah, I think that would be great. And of course, we want to clearly define what we mean. We've already gotten some pushback about the fact that, you know, strictly speaking, DMDU doesn't include extreme events that can be that have a probability associated with them. But I think the fact that we see the managers ignoring that led us to include that. And I have to say, I feel a little bit vindicated because NSF just put together a new initiative in the geosciences where they did exactly that. They lumped extreme and compounding and other hazards in much the same way I think we're visualizing it here, because I think we all see the same need of we're managing for more average conditions and not the extremes. So we're not the only ones doing this, I guess, is my point.
Right. And actually, extreme events is one word concept that I noted when I was glancing at it after your presentation. You know, what are extreme events?
Right. We could define those, sure. Yeah. Yeah. But it's the compounding, it's the sequencing, it's other things that don't have probabilities. Yeah, it's all those things is I think how we're conceiving of it. Tom, did you have another comment, or is your hands just still up? Yeah.
I'm done.
Okay. I thought they had an AI tool now that would take your hand down. I thought that was maybe only some of us have that version. Yeah.
I could use it.
Edmund, why don't you go ahead and bring up the track changes? Let's just quickly look at all the changes and decide if folks think this is adequate. So so we did broaden out the system we're talking about. We clarified this, you know, sources of uncertainty as being broader than climate change here. This is to address this idea that, you know, we're not trying to spend our way out of avoiding all harms, but we're looking for ways that are effective at reducing risk. Okay, let's keep going. And this is adding in a little bit more about the economics, a little bit more about using forecasting when feasible to address DWR's comment. Just tightening up some language. And here's a new major addition. Just trying to address the fact that it's not meant to be the only decision support tool. I think similar to Tanya's comments. And that, yeah, of course, I'm an economist, so of course I agree that we need to consider costs before we decide what actions would be taken. And hopefully the whole board recognizes we have scarce resources to allocate. Added in the piece about stress testing as a very, you know, feasible way to use some of this stuff. And just that you can gain insights just from relatively simple ways of incorporating DMDU, let alone more sophisticated things you can do. And this really is intended to be an interdisciplinary effort. And we reemphasize some parts about stakeholders in some places. So that is what we did to try to clarify some sources of confusion. So I think what we're left with here is to try to work in an example having to do with earthquakes. I feel like we had one at one point. It must have gotten stripped out at some point, but we'll work back in our example about earthquakes. But I think it's clear from some of this later detailed material that we are covering quite a bit of ground. So I think between those two things, we could probably address Tom's comment. Any other major concerns? Minor concerns? Random comments? Okay, now the board's suddenly quiet. The thought of staying late, yeah, made you all quiet, yeah. Okay, well, with that, I guess we're seeking a motion to accept the proposal after we add another example that is not climate change. Looking for my notes.
Add a glossary.
Add a glossary, right? So we will. Well, do we add the glossary to the prospectus or the report? I took that to mean the report. Virginia, what you want to clarify? You're muted. She's nodding now. I think she.
Yeah, I was just saying that the report needs to have it. I don't think we need it at this stage.
Okay, good. Then I interpreted that correctly. So that would be the one change we would make. And then, yeah, if anyone feels motivated to move that we, oh, wait, wait, do we need a motion? Yeah. Oh, we do that after public comment, Edmund? That's how you have it in the notes.
Yeah, we can take public comments now and then they would do a motion, so we don't have to do it again.
Okay, all right. So do we have any public comments?
I currently don't see any public comments.
Okay. In that case, I'm seeking a motion to approve the prospectus.
Sorry, there is a public comment.
Okay, now we have public comment. Yes, go ahead.
Maybe they're waiting for the motion to be made first.
Yeah, that's how we usually do it. Okay, usually we have a motion, then we take public comment. Okay. So,
I move that we approve the prospectus.
okay, and then I guess Anna seconds.
And I
if we
second
need-
the motion.
Yeah, thanks. Okay, now, public comments, please.
Yes, we have them from Deirdre Desjardins. Deirdre, you have the ability to unmute your microphone.
Thank you. Just a brief flag. I'm going to send you some information, but there's the Antarctic sea ice is like 5 sigmas below normal. It's not regrowing this winter, and there's a tipping point. They're concerned that the meridional ocean circulation, which is the deep circulation in the ocean, is slowing down. And I'm going to send you a series of tweets, but there may be, they're thinking that the deep ocean circulation might slow down by 2050. There's some new modeling, very high resolution modeling. So I'm just letting you know, I'm getting that to you. It has to do with new research, and there's events happening right now with Antarctic sea ice and with marine heat waves that scientists are struggling to understand. But I'll try and get it to you as I can to inform the work you're doing with the DMDU. Thanks.
Thank you, Deirdre. That's a perfect example of horizon scanning, one of the elements of scenario development, that you're looking for these sorts of major changes on the horizon, and whether you want to think about their implications. So thank you for that. Do we have any other public comments?
No additional public comments.
Okay, well, with that, we'll do a roll call vote to see if folks approve the motion. Steve.
I approve.
Virginia.
I approve.
Tanya.
Approve.
Tom.
I approve.
Anna.
I approve.
Diane. Did we get Diane?
No.
No. Bob.
I approve.
And Inka.
Yes, I approve.
And Lisa, I approve. Okay, so we have a unanimous approval of the prospectus, and we will make the change of adding another type of example. And then we will continue to move forward with the inventory and analysis of scenario planning and developing interview questions, and we'll have a discussion on that at a future meeting. And not to forget, the Delta ISB, with support from the Delta Science Program, is hosting a seminar series to explore concepts from decision-making under deep uncertainty and present tools that we think might help. And the next seminar is scheduled for August 17th at noon Pacific time. And we're featuring Andrew Parker and Jody Wong of RAND Corporation, who are experts in scenario development and ways to overcome cognitive biases. So we're looking forward to that seminar next time. And with that, we conclude the DMDU section and we move on to subsidence. And I'll turn it over to Tom for this discussion.
Okay. Hey, Edmund, do you want to put the draft up for us to look at?
Yes, just give me a second.
Okay. Right, while Edmund's doing that, we had 3 reviews, 3 comments that came in at the last minute, which is why we weren't able to finish before the last meeting. And the three comments were Gil Casio's. It was sort of a discussion of the status of the levy stability and where we stand. And then Steve Culberson, his comments were more how to implement recommendations from the workshop. And then Louise Conrad had pointed out a report that we were aware of, Lisa Wyndham Myers, which is sort of a state of the art of carbon sequestration in the context of subsidence reversal. And let's see, and she had one other, the cost of water in terms of re-wetting the delta. We've the latter two comments were kind of broad enough that the ones from Culberson and from Conrad were broad enough that they were kind of difficult to incorporate in the report. We did take care of Lisa's study and mention it specifically in the thing, and we've actually talked to Lisa about helping us with one of the sessions, so that I won't go through it unless you want me to, how we've addressed each of the comments at this point. But we've finished that, and we have a structure for the workshop that is still pretty close to where we started. The idea is the 2-day workshop will consist of a morning session that will basically describe all the efforts that people are trying in terms of re-wetting the delta, and there's about 3 or 4 different approaches that are being used. So we will have people who are involved in those experiments in the morning session. The afternoon session will be the greenhouse gas emission aspect, which is actually increasingly becoming an important part of state policy, so that seeing where we are scientifically and where we need to go in terms of improving our understanding. There are complications with the greenhouse gas emissions that are really quite interesting, that give it a time-dependent effect that actually goes a century or 2 out into the future. So addressing that in the second session will be a pretty important perspective on the greenhouse gas emission aspect of the delta. And then the third session, the morning session of the second day, will be basically agricultural interests who are actively trying to do a lot more wetting of the soils. For example, there's a lot of rice growing in the delta now that's in response to managing the subsidence. And then the last session is still a little bit up in the air, but that's intended to be the broader one, where we'll try to take big picture looks at the delta and how we actually implement some of these efforts and what their costs would be. And that's where we'd try and answer Louise's comment about the cost of water in terms of re-wetting the delta. We're still eyeing October, the October meeting for doing this. We have been working on potential panelists, and our list is, I think, getting pretty comprehensive. So now we got to narrow it down, and the thinking is we'll have 3 to 4 speakers that will sort of set the stage, and then we'll have public discussion of the issues that are raised by the panelists. And that's pretty much where we are. I don't know, Christine, do you have any thoughts? you want to add?
No, I think that was a pretty thorough summary.
One important thing is we've changed the title to managing subsided lands because the subsidence reversal is really too narrow an aspect. That's just one of the techniques that's being used in restoration.
I have a small question since no one's speaking. Can I ask it now?
Sure, fine.
So it was actually before you mentioned the titles related to the title. Just as a point of clarification, do you see the scope as being limited to land that is already subsided? With the previous title, I understood it to be a little bit broader in terms of when I think about managing subsidence, it could also be in terms of sort of managing the risk of subsidence or the expansion of subsidence to lands that might not yet be critically affected. And when I read the full text of the prospectus, it doesn't preclude that broader interpretation, but the new title does. And so I'm not pushing it one way or the other. I'm just curious which you have in mind.
Yeah, I think we've dewatered all of the organic soil land, basically, so that I don't think it's a problem pretty much outside the Delta. And just to give you an idea how massive the effort has been, about half of the organic soil in the Delta is gone. It's all been oxidized. And what's happened is some of the land doesn't have much organic soil left to oxidize, but you got to manage what you got. And so that was part of changing the title. It's actually a fairly complex set of conditions in the Delta, from land that's actively subsiding to land that's not actively subsiding but still has organic soil. And so that was the reason for the title change, to make it more comprehensive.
So are you saying that essentially all land is subsided already, and therefore by calling it subsided land, you're not limiting it at all? I think that's what you're saying.
Yeah.
Is that what you're, yeah.
That's what we're trying to say anyway. Yeah, because it's slightly different problems where you have, I mean, there are parts of the Delta where you have ongoing subsidence. So you want to do what you can to reduce it or even stop it if you could, but more likely you're just going to be able to reduce it. And that's where the rice growing comes in and that kind of stuff. And there are probably other crops that aren't being considered, and we're hoping we'll be able to talk about that with people who are actively farming in the Delta or thinking about those issues. Any other questions?
Well, Tom, I don't want to drag you too far into the weeds, but I'm a little curious about how you have responded to Lisa Wyndham. So sorry for getting the last part. Her comments about the fact that she's done a lot of similar work, and I'm saying what ultimately in your mind, how have you differentiated yourself? I would like to have that.
Oh, she's identified a lot of shortcomings, like with the greenhouse gas emissions. One of the challenges, you're sort of balancing carbon dioxide and methane, depending on what you're doing with the water surface. And as you all know, the effectiveness of those gases is very different, with methane being a very strong greenhouse gas. So, you know, in an effort to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions the organic soils, you can actually accelerate it for a short period of time with methane becoming the predominant gas. And I think in my comments, I mentioned these time periods can go on for centuries. And so those kind of trade-offs are going to be essential when people try to make decisions about managing these soils. And Lisa's work identifies the problems, but you know, what we're going to do to actually manage the greenhouse gases is a challenge all by itself. So I mean, she's really just setting the stage for a good, or table for a good discussion of the greenhouse gas emission problem.
Okay, so essentially her work is narrower. Your work is looking at the management options and, but I assume also ongoing research needs related to the net emissions.
Yeah,
no.
I mean, one of the things that would come out of the workshop hopefully would be recommendations on, you know, what we should be monitoring and, you know, in what areas, that kind of stuff. Yeah,
Okay.
gas-wise. Yeah.
So you're really building on that work and going beyond.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I don't look at it as competing with it in any way.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. All right, Virginia has a comment.
Yeah, Virginia.
Sorry, I have to find my unmute button as always. So given the title focus on sustainability, how are you defining sustainability in this report?
How are we sustaining? That's a good question. That actually came from our conversation with Steve Deverell. We ran the title, but so this is just going to be off the top of my head. I was interpreting it as basically preserving the delta as a functional entity, and by that I mean that people can continue to farm and restored areas are restored and that kind of thing.
So I would probably give a different definition as would everybody else here. So if you're going to have that in the title, you need to be very careful and think about it in great detail, because a lot of people throw that word around and never get around to defining it.
Okay, I'll dig a little deeper. I don't know that it's actually critical to the title. Steve had used it in some of his publications. I can take a look at what he meant when he did it.
So I guess for the purposes of potentially moving forward with this, Tom, would you care to suggest how you'll respond to that in modifying the prospectus?
Well, I got to do some sustainability reading, I guess.
So your choice is to leave it in the title and define it.
Well, I guess there's two choices: leave it in the title and define it, or remove it. When Steve suggested it, since I'm not an ecologist by background, I don't spend my days worried about its sustainability.
Well, that's something I do spend my days worrying about. And when I looked at the earlier version, I didn't even find the word sustain or sustainability in it. So just, you need to think about if you're using it and how you're applying it. And Tanya, I'm sure, has some good comments about this.
I think it's a really good point, Virginia, and maybe we just remove it from the title, but think about when we do the report kind of what the ultimate goal is of managing subsided lands, and there are multiple goals, and Tom mentioned it, several of them just now. So I think we can remove it from the title, but then think about in the report kind of the bigger picture of what this is contributing to. That might be my suggestion, just to avoid having to wordsmith again the prospectus to figure out how we're going to define sustainability in the prospectus. And
yeah, I agree with that, Tanya. I'd be inclined to just remove it, but I have to look at it and think about it a little bit more. And we can run it by the group and see where we stand.
Can we just look at the title real quick? We might be able to agree.
Yes, Tom,
so we could approve it.
Yeah, exactly, Tom, because you not choosing, it makes it hard to approve it.
Yeah, we could just decide now if it makes sense without the word. Thank you, Edmund. It could just be managing subsided lands in the Sacramento San Joaquin Delta.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think I'd be comfortable with that. Yeah. Just remove it.
Virginia wants to comment.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I'm all still on mute. So since you made that change to the title, I just suggest you just search for the word in this version and just be
I don't
consistent.
think, I'll be surprised if it's in there because
Me too. Okay, thank you, Tanya. That's good suggestions.
All right, Tom, if we're done with comments and the only real change is the title, then I think we can move on to a motion to approve the prospectus. The revised prospectus.
I move we approve the prospectus with that minor change.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any seconds? And Edmund, do we have any public comment?
We have one from Deirdre Desjardins. Deirdre, you have the ability to unmute your microphone. Thank you.
Yeah, I did just want to say that, and I think Tom is aware of this, but I looked up in my ITRC tables, and rice takes 46 inches of water in the Delta, while grapes of irrigation water, while grapes take about 33 inches. And I know Bogle Vineyards is in the North Delta, and they've made what they term a generational investment in, varieties of grapes, like $20,000 an acre. So there is an issue sort of about the cropping choices may be selected partly for economics and because the Delta is a unique environment for growing good wine. So I hope you'll at least keep the concept of sustainability in there and look at the intersection, because there's other factors that go into crop choices. And grapevines are resilient, are more resilient, are relatively resilient to flooding as well. So it's just something to be aware of, and I'll send you the tables.
Thank you, Deirdre. That's a good comment, and I was aware of it, and hopefully that'll receive significant discussion during the second day of the workshop, when we'll actually have agricultural interests, and then what can we do to manage these lands in the Delta, and certainly water usage is going to be a big part of that.
All right, do we have any other comments, public or otherwise?
No additional public comments.
All right, well then let's move on to the roll call vote. Please state whether you're in favor of accepting the prospectus with the minor change of the title. Steve?
I approve.
Virginia?
I approve.
Tanya?
I approve.
Tom?
I approve.
Anna?
I approve.
Bob?
Yes, I approve.
Inga?
I approve.
And Lisa, I approve. Okay, another unanimous approval of finalizing that prospectus. And we really do appreciate all the public comments we've received, and they definitely were used to make the prospectuses better. So now we are ready to move on to our next agenda item. Well, first of all, there's a follow-up item here that, Tom, your next plan is to draft the workshop agenda and start inviting speakers, or you probably keep refining the agenda and then start inviting speakers? Is that correct?
Yeah, we'll be working on the speakers, and then depending on the composition of the speakers, we'll work out the agenda. So.
And then the date, the intended date for this workshop, remind us again?
I think it's the October 18th, 19th.
Right, okay.
There's some scheduling conflicts and that's something that we're going to have to get worked out because we'll be inviting people, in about a month. So.
Yeah, I'm sure you want to get folks booked as soon as you can. So good. Okay, well, that's that for that agenda item. And we're going to move on to agenda item 7 now, which is preparing for upcoming Delta ISB meetings. So the August meeting is going to be a virtual meeting. And as I said earlier, we're going to have this one DMDU seminar by Andrew Parker and Jody Wong on how their methods they use for scenario development and some of the issues that arise in doing this with stakeholders. We'll have status updates on the reviews. We'll be discussing the Delta Science Program's grand challenges as Laurel described during her update. We may have a science needs assessment discussion depending on progress on that. And that's what we have right now for the August agenda. And then September will also be a teleconference agenda. And at this point, we have tentatively scheduled a DMDU seminar on how some scenario development is being done in the Delta. So it's a complement to the RAND folks who are giving us a broad view of the techniques. And then here's an on the ground example for the Delta that follows a lot of those recommendations. So that is so far what we have planned, but we're still confirming that speaker. So you'll hear more. So that is what I have. Any comments from the board on upcoming meetings? Nope. Okay. And then Edmund, we turn it over to you. Item number 8, review of items for follow-up, or do we need to take public comments on this?
Yeah, we need to take public comments, but we have none.
Okay. All right. And now I'll turn it over to you to review our follow-up items.
Yep. So for the follow-up items, I have that Inga and Bob will consider the comments from today and discuss whether the draft parietal research plan warrants a board review. If anyone else is interested or has thoughts, feel free to email me after this meeting. In addition, for the Delta Lead Scientist report, we have a few follow-up items. As Laurel mentioned, the goal is to get a recruitment flyer out for soon after this meeting, and she'll consider the comments from today, such as broadening water operations to water flows, hydrological conditions, or hydrodynamics, and also considering some of the comments about the word ecosystem level. But once the flyer is out, feel free to help advertise, and also please email Laurel and myself if you have suggested individuals to invite. The Food Webs review is working on a workshop agenda and outline, and that will be shared with the board at a future meeting to discuss. For decision-making under deep uncertainty, today the board approved the prospectus with an edit to incorporate earthquake hazards to help clarify that the MDU, this review is not just focused on climate change. The review leads will be moving forward with the inventory and scenario planning analysis, and also developing interview questions. More of that to come at a future meeting. For the subsidence review, the board also approved the content of that prospectus with an edit to the title to cross off sustainability. The review leads will take one final proofread of it to make sure the word sustainability, it doesn't pop up anywhere else in the review. The review leads for the subsidence review are working on a workshop agenda, and we'll begin inviting speakers shortly. And then the current workshop date is October 2023, and we're working to resolve some board member conflicts. So stay tuned on the exact dates and times for that workshop. That wraps it up for my follow-up items, unless anyone has anything to add or modify.
No, but Edmund, I will just say, if we're going to be talking about the grand challenges at the next meeting, it would be great to know what sort of materials we might receive in advance, so we can have some time to think about those big issues.
Yeah, Laurel will be circulating a 2-pager, and that will be released the Friday before the meeting.
If we could get it any earlier, that would be good. So, but I understand things don't always happen early.
I'll say no later then.
That's good.
All right, that concludes my follow-up item report, and there are no public comments for this agenda item.
Okay. And then I just want to make sure we don't have any loose ends about anything earlier. Are there any other comments from anyone here? For example, Laurel, did you have any other comments you wanted to add on your topics? She's not unmuting, so I assume the answer is no. Okay, well then we'll go on to the final thing, the final agenda item 9. Are there public comments for matters not on the agenda, but within our purview?
Yeah, there is one from Deirdre Desjardins. Deirdre, you have the ability to mute your microphone. Thank you.
It did not, we discovered from a Public Records Act request that the contract for the Delta Independent Science Board's 2 postdocs was proposed to be shortened. And we will be advocating for the Delta Independent Science Board has only 2 dedicated researchers, and we have significant concerns, and we will be raising that issue. I apologize for not getting to it sooner. There have been other issues with Delta Science Program grant proposals, but I did want to let you know that we did discover it and also feel that it's not something that should only have been disclosed in a Public Records Act request. So thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Deirdre. Okay, well, with that in mind, let's wrap up this meeting. You can see what a worrier I am. We not only didn't have to go late, but we're ending early. But you know, I'm a worrier. What can I say? Always planning for eventualities that don't necessarily appear. Maybe that's why I like decision making under deep uncertainty. So with that, I think we can end early and give people time to get where they need to get to. And thank you all for a great meeting and a lot of engagement. Really appreciate it.